Kip wrote in. Kip says, hey, David, it seems like warfare is really changing between drones, cyber war, sanctions, and other tools. Will we ever have a major world war yet again? Very interesting question. I think that we are clearly going away from the idea of these major world wars being possible for a few reasons. Now, I'm against nuclear proliferation. I am against it. But it is true that if it is known that a country has nuclear weapons, it does serve as somewhat of a deterrent to a country that does not have them from getting involved militarily in some kind of major war sort of scenario. Although I think that there are way more reasons to proliferate from nuclear weapons than to have them as a deterrent. Globalization is a major factor, right? When you look at trade right now and you look at the sort of supply chain, there are fewer and fewer parts of the world that are sort of disconnected from impacting major Western powers, which it's just sort of the reality. That's a big factor in terms of how warfare, like the old days, is or isn't going to be done. So I think that globalization and trade deals are a big part of why we wouldn't see that. And I also think that cyber warfare and drones are a really, really big factor because you can do much more damage relative to the risk that you expose yourself to through technological means like drone warfare as well as cyber warfare. So I do believe that we are moving away from the sort of major world war and wars of the style of World Wars I and II and the Vietnam War.
Well, just starting with the nuclear weapons point, I mean, since the 50s, we've had the concept of mutually assured destruction.
Yep.
But I think that assumes that we have rational actors in our roles of leadership.
Yes.
And when you look at like Donald Trump,
Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un, I mean, you can't just make that assertion necessarily.
I think that sometimes we understate the rationality of Kim Jong-un. And believe me, I am a major critic of Kim Jong-un, but I guess what I'm talking about is the North Korean regime at large. We are now in the third generation of this wacky megalomaniac family running North Korea, and they still do seem to have limits as to what they do. They will bluster, they will do missile tests and make incredible threats, but they haven't actually gone further. And I know that a lot of people will say, well, they've not yet developed the mega nuke that they could drop on New York City. But I'm not talking about that. They've not gone even nearly as far as their current technology would allow them to. So while I believe that Kim Jong-un and that regime is incredibly erratic, I do think, Pat, that some people overstate the erraticism of the North Korean regime. When it comes to starving their own people, there is no overstating it. But when it comes to at any point they'll launch a nuke against the U.S., we're on generation 3 right now.
Right. I mean, they may just be waiting to a point where they can attach a nuclear weapon to a warhead. Though,
lying in wait until that key
hit
moment.
The West Coast.
Maybe. I don't
know.
Never know. Do you think there's something to it, though, that they do seem to have some limits to what they know would just create? It would be a suicide action.
It's mostly bluster. I mean, how can we say for sure? But even if there's a 5% chance, that's still very, very concerning.
Yeah, it's a 1 out of 20 chance, and they've made more than 20 threats so far. Okay, so very good question. I do believe we are moving away from this paradigm of the sort of major world war as we saw during the 20th century.